quietly, and without warning, he changed everything. The bells of St. Peter's had not rung. No grand proclamations shook the earth. No shouts of revolution echoed through the marble halls. And yet, behind the heavy doors of the Apostolic Palace, a silent storm was already breaking. Pope Leo XIV didn't come with thunder. He came with silence, sandals upon ancient stones, hands clasped in prayer, eyes filled with something the Church had not seen in decades, uncompromising obedience to God, unpolluted by the machinery of power. The world watched, but few understood. And now, Rome trembles. In the dim corridors where whispered secrets crawl like shadows, many have begun to ask, who truly is Pope Leo XIV? How did this unassuming American cardinal, born Robert Francis Prevost, rise from the quiet peripheries of missionary work to the throne of Peter? How could he, in mere weeks, ignite reforms that would pierce even the seasoned conscience of Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, a man known across the Catholic world for his humility, his tenderness, and his unbreakable loyalty to the Spirit of Christ? Because this was not merely a change of papacy. This was the unfolding of a mystery, one hidden beneath layers of Vatican tradition, geopolitical calculations, and the long prophetic shadows cast by Fatima, Garabandal, and the warnings of Akita, Dei. The crows circled St. Peter's Dome in the days following Pope Francis's passing on April 21, 2025. Many expected politics, deals, the old dance of alliances within the conclave. But heaven had other plans. When Pope Leo XIV stepped onto the balcony on May 8, 2025, he did not raise his arms as others had. He simply whispered, "Ora pro nobis." The world's cameras flashed, but behind the flashes, something ancient stirred. This was not a man here to maintain power. This was a man chosen to strip it bare. And within days, the reforms began. The purple and crimson robes of power were ordered simplified. Bishops across the globe were summoned quietly and instructed to donate vast properties back to the poor. The Vatican Bank's secret accounts were frozen under a personal audit by the Holy Father himself. Papal audiences were no longer filled with heads of state and billionaires, but widows, orphans, and the displaced. And then, the whispers turned to gasps. At morning mass in the private chapel of the Domus Sanctae Marthae, the Pope appeared barefoot. No gold, no silk, no polished throne, simply a shepherd, returning to the God who walks barefoot. Inside the College of Cardinals, unease grew. There were glances, silent meetings, murmurs behind tapestries, and at the center of them stood Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, faithful yet troubled, for even Tagle, the gentle Filipino prince of the church, was shaken. Whispers came to him. He will dismantle everything. He threatens centuries of balance. This is no longer just reform. This is a purification. And yet, in prayer, Cardinal Tagle found no rebuke for Leo XIV, only silence. And in that silence, an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps this was exactly what heaven had always intended. As the world obsessed over the surface reforms, AI ethics councils, Gaza ceasefire appeals, and the Jubilee celebrations, deep beneath Vatican soil, older movements had begun. One of Leo XIV's most shocking decrees has not yet been fully understood by the faithful: the unsealing of select portions of the secret archives. The centuries-old files, once locked under keys held by only a few, were being reviewed, not by politicians but by monks handpicked by the Pope himself. And within those ancient pages, rumors of unrevealed portions of Fatima, lost prophecies of Malachi, and forbidden correspondences from the reign of Pope Pius V. The far question now whispered even among cardinals: has Pope Leo XIV discovered something so profound, so devastating, that he has no choice but to purify the bride of Christ before the next storm arrives? For the storm is coming. You can feel it in the air. The church is trembling not only under the weight of change, but under the weight of an approaching reckoning. Because these reforms are not reforms. They are a preparation for what? That, my friends, is the terror that keeps the princes of the church awake at night. Even Cardinal Tagle, seated one evening beneath the great crucifix in his private chapel, was seen weeping. Not tears of rebellion, not anger, but of holy fear. Fear that perhaps they had all become too comfortable. Fear that perhaps the bride of Christ had wandered far from her groom. And now, through Leo XIV's hands, the Lord was calling his church back, violently, lovingly, completely. The barefoot shepherd had come, and in his wake, the marble floors of the Vatican are beginning to crack. But this is only the beginning. The morning sun rose gently over St. Peter's Square, but within the ancient walls, the light that streamed through the stained glass seemed almost reluctant, as though even heaven itself hesitated to fully illuminate what was unfolding. Inside the apostolic palace, the atmosphere had shifted. What once echoed with the quiet rhythm of tradition now pulsed with a strange, unsettling heartbeat. The Curia, the very machinery of Vatican governance, was beginning to fracture under the weight of Pope Leo XIV's quiet but relentless, and as it began with the unexpected removal of titles long thought untouchable, bishops stripped of their honorary positions, archbishops recalled from embassies of luxury, monsignors reassigned to missionary fields where dirt paths replaced marble corridors. The old order, built on generations of privilege, was dissolving. There were those who tried to stop him. Some whispered of ancient agreements, of pacts made between kingdoms and altars. They spoke of hidden archives, of the concordats, of secret letters between the Vatican and powerful world governments. But Pope Leo XIV listened to none of it. He held no audience for politics, only prayer, only silence. But the silence was not empty. It was a silence that burned. Even Cardinal Tagle, beloved by the poor, saw the tremors reach his feet. He had defended Pope Leo in private conversations. He had calmed nervous bishops, assuring them that this was not rebellion, that it was renewal. But Tagle too had begun receiving reports. The Pope's new council, a circle of barely known priests and contemplatives, was meeting in secret, locations within the Vatican gardens. There were rumors that they were reviewing not just doctrine, but prophecies long buried. One evening, as the moon hung high over Rome, Cardinal Tagle was summoned quietly. No guards, no processions, just a personal invitation, handwritten by Pope Leo himself. Tagle entered a dim chamber beneath the apostolic library. Candles flickered along the stone walls. And there, at the center, stood Pope Leo XIV, barefoot, again. "My brother Luis," the Pope began softly, "do you believe the time of sifting has begun?" Tagle, steady yet weighed down, replied, "Holy Father, only God knows the hour." Leo XIV's eyes narrowed with a grief almost too heavy to carry. "He knows, and he has shown me things that will not allow us to remain as we were." Upon a wooden table before them lay ancient manuscripts, not public papal bulls, not mere theology, but letters that had been hidden away for generations. They spoke of betrayals, of infiltration, of the great apostasy that saints had warned of. One parchment carried words scribbled during the pontificate of Pope Pius V. "There will come a shepherd in simple garments, raised from the peripheries, whose silence will thunder across the earth. In his days, the church will weep, for she must be cleansed before the clouds gather over Rome." Pope Leo's hand trembled as he pointed to the words. "Luis, the clouds are already forming." Cardinal Tagle's heart raced, not with fear for himself, but with the chilling realization that the Church was not facing simple reform. It was facing judgment. The following morning, the world awoke to 10 decrees, the first wave of what would soon be called the 10. Shakings. The immediate sale of underused Vatican properties worldwide, redirecting funds to debt forgiveness for the poorest dioceses. The full disclosure of Vatican bank operations to an independent, outside panel of auditors. The permanent banning of indulgent sales in any form, closing every loophole that had corrupted grace. The appointment of lay theologians, both men and women, as permanent advisors to the College of Cardinals. The suppression of political lobbying by any bishopric or national conference. The forbidding of honorary titles for financial donors. No more seats sold for privilege. The establishment of an international tribunal for bishops accused of abuse or corruption, directly under the Pope's authority. The return of stripped-down barefoot liturgies for all papal masses. As Christ walked, so shall his shepherds. The suspension of diplomatic immunity for any church official investigated for crimes against the innocent. The declassification of sealed portions of Marian revelations still hidden from the world. As these announcements swept across Catholic media, the Church entered an earthquake. The faithful rejoiced. The powerful panicked. News networks described it as the Vatican Revolution, but they missed the true story. This was not revolution, it was reckoning. From behind gilded doors, voices of opposition gathered, powerful men who had never been questioned, now stripped of their protections. A shadow council, desperate to preserve the old ways, began holding secret midnight meetings. Among them were cardinals with long histories, some whom Pope Francis had quietly tolerated, but whom Pope Leo would no longer allow to operate. Leo XIV will destroy us, one whispered. No, another corrected. He will expose us. In the midst of this storm, the question hanging over Cardinal Tagle's soul deepened. Was Leo XIV acting alone, or was heaven moving him? And then came the first public miracle. On the feast of Corpus Christi, as Pope Leo XIV celebrated Mass, in the open square, clouds gathered over Rome. Lightning struck the tip of St. Peter's, a sign eerily echoing the night Pope Benedict XVI resigned. The crowd gasped, but Leo XIV continued calmly, voice steady. Do not fear the signs. Fear the sin that made them necessary. The very next morning, secret photographs leaked. Inside the Vatican archives, one of the hidden scrolls, rumored to be an unspoken portion of the third secret of Fatima, had been unsealed. What was inside? Rome would not say, but the timing was not coincidence. Now, every whisper in the Church carried a single word on trembling lips: purification. But as the word purification spread like wildfire, it was not only the faithful who were stirred. Powers long hidden within the corridors of the Vatican and far beyond its walls awoke like ancient beasts from their slumber. There had always been rumors, of course, quiet murmurs that parts of the Vatican bureaucracy had grown compromised over decades, infiltrated by those who no longer served heaven, but power itself. The whispers spoke of a shadowed network, older than even some of the papacies, known only in coded circles as the Council of Darkness. For years they had been untouchable, protected by layers of bureaucracy, diplomatic immunity, and silence. Until now, Pope Leo XIV, with his unassuming sandals and prayerful gaze, had done the unthinkable. He had stepped into their territory without fear. His reforms were not simply administrative corrections. They were strikes against an invisible empire embedded within the very structure of the Church, and with each reform, he was pulling back the veil. The Council of Darkness watched, and they seethed, from secret rooms beneath the Lateran Palace to quiet diplomatic dinners in foreign embassies. The question they now debated was dangerous. Could Leo XIV be stopped? And yet, as they plotted, a new kind of tremor shook the spiritual realm. For as the powers of man resisted, the powers of heaven advanced. Signs multiplied. In a remote convent in Portugal, a young nun known for her visions suddenly collapsed during prayer. Her lips whispered words no one expected. "The clock is striking, the clock is striking, but who will hear before the bell of judgment tolls?" In Argentina, a statue of Our Lady of Sorrows was seen weeping blood, confirmed by multiple witnesses, including secular journalists who arrived skeptical and left trembling. In the Philippines, during a Eucharistic adoration service led by Cardinal Tagle himself, dozens claimed to see an ethereal figure of the crucified Christ appear above the altar, his eyes not of wrath, but of piercing sorrow. Tagle, already carrying the weight of his secret meetings with Leo XIV, felt his yow. Soul being torn between two worlds, the old church that he had defended so long, and this new, terrifying work of heaven that now demanded absolute surrender. For even as Leo XIV brought light, darkness retaliated. International media outlets, some financed by hidden hands, began releasing aggressive attacks against the Pope. They accused him of destabilizing global financial agreements, of jeopardizing Vatican diplomacy, even of theological heresy for placing too much emphasis on Marian prophecies. But Leo XIV did not respond. Instead, he issued a single, chilling statement to the world. "The hour is late. The divisions in my church have already been measured. Let the wheat and the tares grow together for a little longer. Soon, the harvesters will arrive." And Rome fell silent. Inside Vatican City, tensions reached a boiling point. Cardinals who once smiled at photo ops now refused to make eye contact with each other. Factions hardened, allegiances shifted, and in the shadows, the Council of Darkness prepared their most dangerous countermove. A plan to pressure certain cardinals to publicly oppose the Pope, to create, for the first time in modern history, the threat of a Vatican schism. Cardinal Tagle was their target. He was loved by millions, respected worldwide, and seen by many as a spiritual successor to Pope Francis. If he could be persuaded or coerced to distance himself from Leo XIV's purging reforms, it could split the church in half overnight. One late night, Tagle was approached in his private residence by an emissary. The man carried no papers, no guards, only a message. "You are still loved by many in the Curia," he whispered. "We do not ask for rebellion, only for balance. Distance yourself from the extremism. Speak gently against these new decrees. The church needs moderation, not chaos. You could preserve unity." But Tagle's face, though tired, grew stern, and his answer, whispered like a prayer, cut through the visitor's offer. "Did not Christ say, 'I did not come to bring peace but a sword'?" The emissary left without another word. And yet, deep within Tagle's heart, the battle raged. Because while his loyalty to Christ was unshakable, the pain of watching the church enter such violent spiritual labor was almost unbearable. He knelt, that night for hours, weeping before the Blessed Sacrament, crying out, "Lord, do not let your bride fall into ruin, but if you must break her, let it be to make her holy again." The next morning, news broke that further decrees were coming. More property seizures, new audits into decades-old Vatican diplomatic deals, even the reassignment of certain high-ranking prelates who had long wielded untouchable power. And behind the scenes, the Council of Darkness grew desperate. They had one final weapon left. A secret file, a file containing information from decades ago. Information that could scandalize the church, undermine Leo XIV's moral authority, and fracture the faith of millions if released. As the file was prepared, couriered secretly to international media contacts, Rome itself seemed to groan. That night, thunder cracked above St. Peter's like the voice of judgment. Lightning struck again, and a blood moon rose. But even as darkness advanced, heaven was not silent. For in a vision, later reported by cloistered nuns across Europe that same night, a voice was heard repeating, "You have seen what is now, but soon you will see what was hidden. And when the trumpet sounds, the nations will tremble. For my church shall pass through the fire, and the fire shall make her spotless." As dawn approached, the Vatican seemed to hold its breath. The world outside continued as always. Tourists filled St. Peter's Square, pilgrims knelt in prayer, the morning bells rang. But inside the marble walls, invisible swords were being drawn. The Council of Darkness had reached its final stage. The secret file, their ultimate weapon, was already in motion. Arrangements had been made with several global media outlets. The file would leak within 48 hours. Its contents would suggest not only financial misdeeds from decades past, but horrifying implications that could cause a catastrophic loss of faith. It was not simply an attack on Pope Leo XIV. It was an attack on the very credibility of the Church itself. And yet, Pope Leo XIV remained unmoved. That morning, as the storm clouds gathered once more above Rome, he celebrated Mass, barefoot, as always, inside the small chapel of Santa Marta. Few were allowed inside. Among them was Cardinal Tagle. Throughout the Mass, Leo's homily was simple but piercing. "Brothers, do not be afraid of the breaking. The Lord does not cleanse his house with softness, but with fire. And what he does now is not for ruin, but for restoration. The wheat must pass through the threshing floor, and those who cannot bear the fire were never wheat to begin with." The air in the chapel grew heavy. Even the marble seemed to sweat. After Mass, Leo XIV turned to Tagle. "My brother Luis," he said gently, "tonight they will release the file." Tagle's eyes widened. "Then this is the moment they seek your fall." Leo XIV shook his head. "No, this is the moment Christ claims his bride back." For a brief second, Tagle saw something behind Leo's eyes, not fear, but a divine certainty that made his own knees weaken. As night descended, the file was leaked. The news exploded across the world. Headlines screamed, "Historic scandal inside the Vatican." Pope Leo XIV linked to hidden documents. Centuries of cover-ups exposed. Pundits, commentators, and even some cardinals began calling for Leo XIV's resignation. The Council of Darkness celebrated, believing they had delivered the fatal blow. But what none of them knew was that heaven had gone ahead of them. For as the reports flooded in, an anonymous source released a second set of documents to the world, this time containing not false accusations, but incontrovertible evidence exposing the existence and actions of the Council of Darkness itself. Secret accounts, bribes, decades of protected predators, false apparitions engineered to manipulate political power, even records of meetings where attempts were made to suppress parts of the Fatima message for fear it would cause panic in the global faithful. The world gasped, and then the final blow came. In the middle of the Vatican gardens, at an emergency gathering of the remaining curia, Pope Leo XIV appeared unannounced. No entourage, no ceremony. Only carrying one object, a simple, ancient scroll, authenticated by Vatican archivists mere hours before. He opened it and began to read aloud. "In the latter days, there shall arise within my sanctuary shepherds who serve not me, but Mammon. They will clothe themselves in my vestments, but betray my name. Yet I shall raise one who comes not in pride, but in sandals, to purge my house before my return." It was not written recently. The scroll was dated 1947. Its author, Sister Lucia of Fatima. The gasps were audible. In one moment, heaven itself had testified to what was happening. This was not simply the reform of a pope. It was the fulfillment of long-hidden prophecy. The Council of Darkness collapsed overnight. Arrests followed. Resignations poured in. The faithful wept, not in fear, but in awe. And yet, the greatest shock was still to come. The following Sunday, before millions gathered in St. Peter's Square, Pope Leo XIV made an announcement that would echo across eternity. "My beloved children," he began, his voice trembling yet firm, "the Lord has done his work. But my mission is now complete, for I was never meant to reign. I was sent only to cleanse." The crowd froze. Was he resigning? "Tonight," he continued, "I shall go into silence, into prayer, into the hidden life. Another will rise, chosen not by conclave, but by heaven. The seat of Peter is no longer ruled by politics, but by providence." As the world struggled to process his words, a blinding light, witnessed by thousands, illuminated the heavens above St. Peter's. A cross formed within the clouds, and beneath it, a voice was heard. Some described it as thunder, others as an angel. "The bride is made ready, the time is near." And just like that, Pope Leo XIV vanished from public sight that very night, retreating into an undisclosed monastery. His whereabouts remain unknown to this day. The world still whispers of where he is. Some say he walks the mountains. Some say he lives as a hidden monk. Some say he waits for what comes next. But one truth remains. Pope Leo XIV did not just change the Church. He was the instrument that heaven used to prepare her for the final chapter. And in the hearts of millions, one question now lingers. If this was the purification, how soon until the King returns?